Karen parked her $80,000 0 cents Escalade in my driveway like she was claiming land for her ancestors. So I did what any reasonable suburban guy with leftover mortar and zero patience would do. I built a wall around it. A literal, legally compliant, fully brick-wrapped wall. She said I was petty. I said I was precise. If you've ever wanted to see HOA tyranny crushed by backyard engineering, welcome. This is the Great Wall of Karen. They say every neighborhood has a Karen, but mine came fully loaded with a luxury SUV, a clipboard of bylaws, and a pathological hatred of wind chimes. My name's Ryan Mitchell. I'm 35, worked remote in cybersecurity, and 6 months ago I moved into Oak Pine Hollow, a supposedly peaceful suburban nook where deer roam the green belts and people say things like, "Did you get your mulch delivered yet?" in deadly seriousness. Life here was mostly quiet until I decided to throw a backyard barbecue big enough to scare birds into the next zip code. I don't do small gatherings. If I'm hosting, you can bet there'll be smoked ribs, yard games, and a jazz trio that moonlights as a ska band after dark. I'd sent out invites 2 weeks early. 70 neighbors RSVP'd. People were hyped. Even the guy with the gnome collection said he'd stop by if the brisket passed muster. The day of the party, I was outside setting up tiki torches and checking mic levels when I noticed something strange. A black Cadillac Escalade parked diagonally across my driveway like it had been dropped from the sky by an entitled helicopter. At first, I figured maybe the band arrived early or one of the caterers had an expensive taste in vehicles. I checked. Nope, no one was around. I walked up, peeked through the window, empty. Then I saw the plate frame. HOA Proud Community First, and immediately felt my stomach tighten. Only one person in this entire zip code was smug enough to put that on a license plate. Karen. She lived 4 houses down, ran her mouth like a podcast no one subscribed to, and had a laminated HOA rule book that she carried like a badge of honor. She once tried to fine a family for using a rainbow welcome mat because the HOA color scheme is neutral tones only. I stood there staring at the behemoth blocking my driveway, blinking like maybe it would disappear if I looked away long enough. I called her, straight to voicemail. I texted, "Hey, Karen, your SUV's in my driveway. Need it moved ASAP. Got vendors arriving soon." Nothing. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The band was due in half an hour, and the food truck was circling the block like a confused shark. I tried knocking on her door. No answer. Either she was hiding or she thought claiming my concrete counted as civic duty. I left a voicemail that may or may not have included the phrase, "This Escalade will become a decorative planter if it's not gone in 15 minutes. At that point, I was bluffing, mostly. Towing wasn't even an option. Oak Pines HOA had a brilliant little policy that required 24 hours notice and physical signage to tow from private driveways. Probably written by Karen herself to protect her own antics. I stood there, hands on hips, surrounded by string lights and charcoal fumes, watching a literal blockade form in front of my own house. Guests were going to arrive soon with casserole trays and lawn chairs, and they'd be greeted by a luxury SUV acting like it owned the place. I imagined trying to explain it. "Sorry, folks, the party's inside, but please enter through the hedges. Karen's SUV is occupying the main entrance today." It was absurd. But the worst part wasn't the inconvenience, it was the message. This wasn't just lazy parking, it was a statement, a declaration of dominance by a woman who once filed a noise complaint against an ice cream truck. I didn't know what I'd do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just about a car. She didn't RSVP, but her Cadillac sure did and came early, uninvited, and ready to conquer. I was still pacing the driveway like a frustrated wedding planner when Micah pulled up in his beat-up Tacoma, music blaring and a folding chair sticking halfway out the bed. He hopped out with a grin, holding a six-pack in one hand and a speaker in the other. "Dude, what's with the Escalade? That a new parking sculpture?" I pointed at the beast. "Karen," I said flatly. "She parked it here and vanished. Won't pick up. I ain't tow without jumping through HOA flaming hoops." Micah tilted his head, examining it like an archaeologist encountering an ancient tomb. Then, deadpan, "You should just build a wall around it." I laughed, then stopped laughing, then looked at him. "Don't tempt me," he smirked. "You won't." And there it was, 3 syllables that would change the course of suburban history. You won't I stared at the SUV, then at the growing stack of coolers and chairs on my lawn. My mind raced. No physical damage, just structure. Technically still legal. Want to bet? I shot back. Micah's eyes lit up. Give me 10 minutes. And like some sort of Home Depot summoner, he pulled out his phone and started dialing. Turns out his cousin Tyler had leftover bricks from a retaining wall project. Half an hour later, a flatbed truck pulled up in front of my house like we were filming a very strange episode of Property Brothers. On board, 6 pallets of classic red bricks, 2 tubs of mortar, and a crew of 3 guys who looked entirely too excited to break zoning norms. One of them wore a shirt that said, "Brick happens." I didn't even ask. I didn't plan for it to snowball, but as the first row of bricks took shape, 3 sides, carefully spaced around the SUV, something shifted. A neighbor walked by with her dog, did a double take, and then started laughing so hard she dropped her poop bag. A few more guests trickled in, beer in one hand, potato salad in the other. Instead of asking what was going on, they grabbed gloves and joined in. By the time the brisket hit the smoker, we had 10 people laying bricks, 2 people DJing, and someone handed out iced tea like it was a tailgate party. The vibe went from "we're annoyed" to "we're making history." There was even a guy I'd never met painting a sign that read, "Reserved for special guests only." It did not feel like revenge, not exactly. It felt like performance art, a neighborhood intervention. Karen's SUV stood there clueless and glossy while, brick by brick, we turned her power move into a literal monument of community pettiness. I kept waiting for someone to tell me I was going too far, but every time someone new arrived, they just nodded approvingly and asked, "Where do I stack mine?" One kid even shouted, "Is this the HOA Hunger Games?" I didn't have the heart to correct him. We were all in too deep. Somewhere between the 3rd layer of bricks and the 2nd pitcher of margaritas, the SUV became public enemy number 1. By sunset, the walls stood about 2 feet high. It didn't touch the car. That part was important. It just made leaving very, very complicated. The kind of complicated that said, "We see you, Karen." Fairy lights blinked overhead. Laughter echoed off vinyl fences. The smell of slow-cooked ribs danced through the air while people posed for selfies next to the growing barricade. And I, Ryan Mitchell, nobody, stood in my lawn chair throne, holding a trowel like a suburban Excalibur, wondering how a rogue Cadillac had just launched the weirdest revolution Oak Pine Hollow had ever seen. By the time the sun started dipping behind the rooftops of Oak Pine Hollow, the wall had climbed to a proud 3 feet tall, solid on 3 sides with the 4th just waiting for destiny to strike. Mortar dried in uneven clumps, bricks stacked like we were defending against an invasion of HOA inspectors. Someone, probably Greg from Lot 7, hung a string of solar LED lights across the top like it was a Christmas miracle born from passive aggression. A neighbor I barely knew walked over with a garden gnome wearing a tiny construction hat and placed it right in front of the bricks without a word. And when someone chalked "Park Here Again, Karen," in giant letters across the sidewalk, the crowd actually applauded. The whole thing had mutated from backyard BBQ into a full-blown suburban art project. Every time I turned around, someone had added another personal touch. A woman named Stacy brought out a little chalkboard easel from her porch and wrote, "Construction zone, entitlement ends here." Kids started dragging out cardboard boxes and copying our brick pattern on the lawn like some dystopian sandbox game. And tiny boy in dinosaur pajamas shouted, "I'm building my own HOA trap," and his mom just sipped her sangria and said, "Good job, buddy." Somewhere in the middle of it all, Michael installed a Bluetooth speaker that played 80s rock anthems on loop. Honestly, the wall had better vibes than half the HOA meetings I'd been to. Still, there was one curious silence. Karen. No word, no text, no rage-filled voicemail. Some whispered she'd gone out of town. Others claimed she was watching from behind her blackout curtains, calculating revenge like a Bond villain with a Pinterest board. A few people were convinced she had no idea. Yet. Either way, the Fort of Fairness started getting thrown around, and it stuck. Somebody even made a fake crest with a brick, a spatula, and a tiny flamingo. We duct taped it to the wall like it was a battle flag. It was dumb. It was brilliant. It was ours. And then, as if summoned by the crescendo of laughter and Leonard Skinnerd, Karen appeared, 9:17 p.m. on the dot, wearing a silk robe, bedazzled flip-flops, and that infuriating pair of sunglasses she always perched dramatically on her head like she was blocking the spotlight from a one-woman show. She clutched a smoothie cup like a courtroom exhibit and stared at the brick wall like someone had just murdered her tulips. Her voice cracked the night like a fire alarm. "What is this? What did you do to my car?" The music stopped. Half the crowd froze. Someone whispered, "Showtime." Karen stormed toward the driveway like a judge marching toward a mistrial. "This is illegal," she shrieked. "You can't hold my car hostage. This is vehicular imprisonment." Michael, not missing a beat, sipped his beer and muttered, "Pretty sure it's more like decorative fencing." She whipped out her phone and dialed the police, pacing in front of the wall like a soap opera villain mid-monologue. "Yes, I want to report a crime." "My car is being detained." "Yes, there's a wall. Bricks, actual bricks." She emphasized every word like the operator was hard of hearing insanity. Nobody moved to stop her. Frankly, we all wanted to see what would happen next. I just stood there on the porch, arms crossed, heart beating somewhere between dread and delight. This wasn't just a prank anymore. It was a declaration, and Karen had just walked right into her own public trial, flip-flop smoothie and all. And in that brief hush before the sirens echoed in the distance, someone from the crowd whispered what we were all thinking. She finally found the wall she can't complain her way out of. 15 minutes after Karen's smoothie-fueled meltdown, the flashing blue and red lights rolled into Oak Pine Hollow like the suburban version of Calvary. 2 officers stepped out, calm and professionally exhausted, like men who'd seen one too many block party disputes involving badminton nets and boundary lines. The lead officer, Ramirez according his badge, took one look at the wall, then at Karen, who was gesturing like a game show host revealing a prize behind curtain number 2. "Imprisoned my vehicle," she yelled. "This is malicious masonry." Ramirez blinked twice, turned to me, and said, "Sir, did you build this?" I nodded. "All within my property line," I said, pulling out my phone with the neighborhood plat map already open. GPS coordinates, boundary lines, even a note from the HOA-approved landscaping surveyor. I was ready for war. The officer walked the perimeter, stepping carefully, examining the spacing between the bricks and the SUV. After a few minutes, he shrugged. "Doesn't look like it's touching the car." Karen exploded. "That's not the point. It's psychological entrapment. A vehicle surrounded by bricks is a symbol of intimidation." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I've seen intimidation. This looks more like a community art installation." His partner chuckled and added, "Honestly, I've seen HOA newsletters scarier than this." The neighbors stifled laughter. Karen's eye twitched. She pivoted to her favorite fallback. "This violates our community's aesthetic harmony clause." She said it like she was invoking the Constitution. I calmly replied, "Funny you mention that." I pulled up another folder on my phone, showcasing photos from the neighborhood. A yard with 37 plastic flamingos, a mailbox shaped like a trout, and Greg's infamous inflatable Santa riding a unicorn. Still up in July. "None of those were ever flagged," I said. "But this is the line?" The officers looked at each other, clearly done with the drama. Marinas flipped his notebook shut. "This is a civil matter. No criminal offense. We're not writing anyone up for festive masonry today." Karen screamed something about bias and favoritism, but it faded as the officers walked back to their cruiser. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA board with a subject line that read, "Urgent violation of community guidelines." Inside was a sternly worded letter accusing me of unapproved alterations affecting neighborhood optics. That was their phrasing, neighborhood optics. No specific clause cited, no reference number, just vague disapproval wrapped in bureaucratic passive aggression. I responded with a concise request for clarification, asking for the exact guideline violated, along with examples of consistent enforcement. I attached 10 photos of similar optical offenses, including the Gnome Army, the front lawn haunted house from last Easter, and the guy 2 blocks over who painted his garage door with a mural of bald eagles doing karate. 2 days passed without a reply. Meanwhile, the wall became a minor local attraction. Neighbors brought coffee and folding chairs, some treating it like a living museum. A jogger paused to take selfies. One guy set up an easel and started sketching it plein air, like we were in the French countryside. And all the while, Karen stewed in the background, watching her precious authority get brick-blocked by her own arrogance. She tried to look composed, sipping another smoothie while pacing in her driveway. But everyone could see the cracks, not just in the wall, but we built that thing solid, but in her ego. Now crumbling one tantrum at a time. 3 days after the wall went up, an unmarked envelope appeared in my mailbox like a bad plot twist, mailed first class. Inside was a poorly photocopied complaint addressed to the Pierceville Zoning Department. It accused me, anonymously of course, of erecting an unauthorized structural obstruction that posed a threat to vehicle safety and emotional stability. The tone was familiar. It had Karen's brand of overcooked legal drama all over it. Lots of bold fonts, suspicious grammar, and one very dramatic line that read, "This act of defiance shall not stand." The envelope had no return address, but I'd bet my left sock she mailed it while sipping her third kale smoothie and muttering the word justice like a spell. I could have ignored it, but I'd learned something valuable from this whole circus. Karen didn't stop until she embarrassed herself, and I wasn't about to let that happen off camera, so I made a plan. A stupid, sparkly, legally airtight plan. First, I rigged a motion sensor inside the brick enclosure, tucked between the passenger door and a loose brick tile. It was connected to a small fan, a battery pack, and 2 biodegradable glitter cannons I ordered online. Not the industrial kind, just enough to surprise, dazzle, and ruin any sense of smug composure. The system was simple. Open the car door, and boom, glitter confetti fiesta, no damage, no mess beyond ego, and absolutely no legal line crossed. Then came the camera. I mounted it on my gutter with a perfect view of the SUV's passenger side, motion-activated, night vision, time-stamped, everything above board. And I didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, a black sedan pulled up in front of Karen's house. Out stepped a realtor, clipboard in hand, looking like she was on her 10th showing of the day and already regretting her career. She walked up to Karen's door, got handed keys, and was clearly told to check the car too. It's included in the listing. That's right. Karen had put the house on the market, probably hoping to escape the now declomic Great Wall of Nope without further humiliation. The realtor walked down the driveway, oblivious. I watched from the porch with an iced coffee and the stillness of a man awaiting fireworks. She opened the passenger door. A cloud of gold and silver glitter shot into the air like the 4th of July, collided with a kid's birthday party. The realtor screamed, half horror, half laughter, then stood frozen, absolutely covered in biodegradable sparkle like a disco ball lost its mind. She doubled over laughing, and I couldn't blame her. The footage was perfect, crisp, clear. One glitter-blasted realtor, one spotless SUV, and a brick fortress surrounding it, like a prank monument to suburban resistance. I posted the video that night with the caption, "Karen's Final Sparkle, a Drive-Away Tale." Within 6 hours, it hit 10,000 views. By sunrise, it was on TikTok's neighborhood drama playlist, and someone in the comments had already made a remix with dance music. Memes followed. Someone dubbed the SUV Glitter Max Prison Edition. Another added CGI fireworks and labeled it The Great Detention. My phone exploded. Neighbors cheered. Even people I hadn't met sent texts like, "Dude, that was art." Karen, as expected, said nothing. Not a word. Just retreated behind her blackout curtains while the internet made her driveway debut a suburban legend. And I bought more glitter just in case she ever got any bright ideas. The invitation arrived with all the drama of a government summons. Bold letters, stamped seal, mandatory OO hearing, community dispute resolution. It sounded like a Cold War tribunal. The location, Oak Pine Hollow Clubhouse, a room usually reserved for baby showers and overpriced charcuterie nights. The subject, alleged violation of architectural and behavioral guidelines. In plain English, Karen was taking me to HOA court over a wall that didn't touch her car and glitter that didn't touch her soul. I expected awkward stares and forced neutrality. What I walked into felt more like opening night at a local theater production titled Canvas Common Sense. Karen had arrived early, naturally. She sat near the front, flanked by 3 color-coded binders and a highlighter behind one ear like she was preparing to cross-examine God. Her hair was perfectly blown out, her lips pursed like she'd just bitten into a lemon of injustice. When the board called the meeting to order, she stood like she was ascending the steps of the Supreme Court and launched into a monologue that could have earned her a daytime Emmy. She spoke of emotional distress, targeted humiliation, digital harassment, and something she called glitter-based psychological warfare. I could barely keep a straight face when she described my driveway as a hostile art installation designed to provoke trauma. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mock. I simply pulled out a folder labeled Receipts. First, I presented the neighborhood plat map, clearly marking my driveway boundaries. Then the HOA regulations with every relevant clause highlighted. I showed photos of her Escalade parked illegally on my property, time-stamped text messages, call logs, and a polite, if slightly sarcastic, voicemail requesting she move it. Then came the neighbor testimonials. Dozens, printed, signed, dated, accounts of Karen's past HOA rampages, finding a mother for sidewalk chalk, calling animal control on a therapy dog, threatening legal action over wind chimes that were too melodic. The room was quiet, not awkward quiet, poetic justice quiet. Even the board members looked shell-shocked, shuffling papers like they were trying to disappear into them. Finally, the chairwoman cleared her throat and said, "Given the documentation and testimonies, we find no actionable violations. This appears to be an unfortunate but lawful escalation." Karen's face went rigid, no words, just a slow, silent burn like she was trying to set me on fire with her eyes and binder tab. Her hands trembled as she gathered her paperwork, each movement increasingly jagged until she shoved the highlighter back in her purse like it had betrayed her. She stood, didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone, just turned on her heel and walked out. But not quickly, not angrily, slowly, like someone realizing in real time that the empire they thought they ruled had just politely asked them to leave. Her robe of entitlement had frayed. The audience? Silence until the door clicked shut behind her. Then a cough, a chair squeak, and finally a whisper from someone in the back. "Guess the wall wins." I didn't smile, not yet, because this wasn't over, but it was the first time Karen left a room without taking the spotlight with her, and that silence, that was better than applause. A few mornings after the HOA hearing, Karen launched her final smear campaign with a kind of flair only she could muster. Folded paper flyers, printed in all caps, font size 16, with bolded phrases like mob justice and brick-based harassment. She personally delivered them to every house on our street like she was handing out sacred scrolls of slander. I found mine tucked inside a gardening magazine, wedged passive-aggressively into the mailbox. It had the tone of someone who believed they were moments away from starting a petition, a movement, or at least a neighborhood book club called Karen's Truths, but it flopped harder than a HOA Christmas potluck during a blizzard. Nobody took her seriously, not even close. Some folks read the flyer just to giggle. One neighbor laminated theirs and hung it on the fridge like ironic kitchen art. Another taped it to their front door with a sticky note underneath. "Best fiction I've read all year." The document was so over the top, people assumed it was satire. She claimed I had weaponized visual obstruction and referred to the glitter blast as an unprovoked sparkle assault. At one point, she even accused the HOA board of emotional alignment with hostile architecture. I almost framed that line. It had poetry. But something else was happening too, something quiet, subtle, and surprisingly powerful. Bricks started showing up. Not in walls, not in retaliation, just there. One neighbor placed a single red brick next to her mailbox with a tiny sign that read, "Peace, not permits." Another arranged 3 bricks on their garden path and etched into them with chalk, "Boundaries matter." It wasn't organized. No one coordinated it. But the message was crystal clear. Karen hadn't just lost an argument, she'd lost the room. And in her absence, people were reclaiming their space, brick by symbolic brick. Then one afternoon, I found a small package on my porch. No return address. Inside was a worn, slightly chipped brick wrapped in paper. The handwriting was careful, blocky, written in black marker. "Respect lives in boundaries." No name, no note, just that phrase, and a single red string tied around the center like a ribbon at a silent funeral. I stood there for a long time just holding it, wondering who sent it. Maybe someone who had been on the receiving end of Karen's self-appointed authority. maybe, maybe someone who just needed to see the wall to believe that resistance didn't have to be loud, it just had to be firm. A few days later, without fanfare or warning, a moving truck appeared outside Karen's house. It was early, barely sunrise. Two men loaded boxes in silence. She emerged once, wearing sunglasses and a scarf like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. No one approached her, no one waved. She didn't knock on doors or leave goodbyes. She simply got in the passenger seat of a rented sedan and disappeared down the street without ever looking back. The SUV stayed behind for another 2 days before a distant cousin came to claim it, but for all intents and purposes, Karen was gone. And for the first time since I moved in, Oak Pine Hollow felt lighter, like the HOA bylaws themselves had exhaled. A week after Karen's silent exit, I stood in my driveway with a chisel in one hand and a coffee in the other, staring at what had become the most talked about 4 feet of suburban real estate in the county. The wall had done its job. It had spoken without saying a word. Now it was time to take it down. Not out of surrender, but closure. I dismantled it slowly, brick by brick, stacking them neatly near the shed. But I didn't toss them all. I kept 7, the original first row, and arranged them in a small semicircle by the garden bed. In front of them, I placed a modest granite plaque that read, "This space is not for Karens." No fanfare, no ceremony, just a quiet, unmistakable message that boundaries, once set, deserve to be remembered. 2 days later, a local DIY YouTube channel messaged me. They'd seen the glitter video, which for some reason was trending again, and wanted to interview the man who weaponized home improvement. I said yes. They came with cameras, microphones, and a host who wore a flannel shirt with suspiciously rolled up sleeves. We talked about zoning laws, property lines, and how to build structures that were both emotionally symbolic and code compliant. Their video, titled "Justice by Design, The Man Who Bricked an SUV Legally," went semi-viral. The comments ranged from, "Where can I buy a glitter cannon?" to "This is the energy we need in local government." A week later, someone mailed me a brick painted gold with the label "For Future Fortifications." That's when I realized maybe there was more to this than just a petty neighborhood legend. So I started a channel of my own. I called it Brick Logic. At first, it was just me talking about the wall, how it started, how it stayed legal, how it somehow involved a smoothie and an HOA hearing, but then people started sending me their own stories, tales of mailbox wars, overgrown hedge disputes, and one guy who built a lawn sculpture shaped like a flaming middle finger. He painted it green and called it abstract topiary. The theme was always the same: setting boundaries creatively, standing your ground without crossing the line. I shared them weekly. People watched, people commented, people related. Meanwhile, Karen's Final Sparkle got a second life. Some influencer stitched it into a dance challenge. A podcast played the audio of the glitter blast while breaking down top 10 suburban justice moments. One commenter dubbed me Brick Boss 2025, and honestly, I've been called worse. A t-shirt company reached out asking if they could print "This space is not for Karens" on coffee mugs, mouse pads, and stress bricks. I declined the mouse pads, said yes to the stress bricks, felt poetic. Life in Oak Pine Hollow changed too. Without Karen's looming presence, people started acting lighter. Conversations happened at mailboxes. Kids rode scooters past 5 p.m. without code enforcement threats. One guy even started hosting porch trivia nights, and nobody filed noise complaints. The HOA meetings got shorter, calmer. Someone suggested renaming them community chats, and shockingly, the motion passed unanimously. Even Greg's inflatable Santa unicorn made a comeback, this time with fairy lights and 0 complaints. On one of those unusually perfect Saturdays, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and watched it all unfold. Kids playing hopscotch, a couple walking their dog, someone setting up a lemonade stand that probably didn't have a permit. No one cared. Laughter floated across fences. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically like applause. And for once, no one was yelling about trash bins being left out too long or grass height being 1.2 inches overregulated. The neighborhood had exhaled, and I let myself breathe with it. I glanced at the stack of bricks by the shed, then back to the driveway, now clean, open, and oddly peaceful. The kind of peace that doesn't come from rules or silence, but from respect. The wall was gone, but the message stayed. Boundaries matter, community matters more. And when those two things align, well, sometimes it just takes a little concrete and a whole lot of glitter to remind people where the line is. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe. It wears work gloves and holds a trowel. Sometimes it doesn't shout, it sparkles. Not every battle needs to be loud. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply not backing down. This story isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries, about what happens when one person thinks the rules don't apply to them, and the rest of the community decides enough is enough. Through a wall of bricks and a blast of glitter, we learned that setting limits doesn't have to be cruel. It can be creative, legal, and even a little funny. Karen may have left, but the lesson stayed. Entitlement can be loud, but respect speaks louder when backed with action. So whether you're dealing with an HOA tyrant, a workplace micromanager, or just someone who can't take no for an answer, remember, you don't have to scream, just stand your ground, brick by brick. If this story made you smile, share it, comment your favorite moment, and don't forget to subscribe for more Brick Logic Justice.